Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to start a little bit different because I know that this guest, who is my frequent guest and who I so much appreciate, and I'm very grateful for Scott Ritter joining me again. I just want to say something of this nature. There's a lot of channels on YouTube in Russia, actually, I came across that want to spread the informations and the truth. And they are actually coming across, for example, our conversations or other like-minded channels and people, and they are putting the content out and translating into English. And by all means, I up into Russian. I don't mind at all, like, go for it. Just if you can mention at least who is the host, that would be nice, because, you know, it takes two to the tango, like they say, right? So anyway, today I am joined again by Scott Ritter. I'm very grateful, Scott, for your time, especially after the crazy NATO summit. So welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I'm ready for this. Was looking forward to it. Even though I'm smiling, this is actually not a funny situation right now. So we are in this point where NATO increased from 40,000 troops to 300,000 troops to be on a high alert, as I believe, from next year, and gonna send them to Eastern Europe. And of course, mainly to Poland, where permanent army headquarters will be created. US warship will go to Spain, fighter jets to the UK, and the ground troops to Romania. That's what I came across. On the top of it, we have General Sanders, who is the general of British forces, who in his speech is actually talking about mobilizing the military, and that means the reserves, the civilians, pretty much everyone in UK who can join the army for the conflict with Russia. And UK has already sent troops to Estonia, actually double it, which is 16,000 troops in Estonia from United Kingdom. Scott, there's so much to talk about. I have lots of questions, but let's start with this. What does it really mean? What are they doing? And those troops being stationed in certain countries, your opinion about this move from NATO?
Well, let's start with the rapid reaction forces or rapid response forces, going from, I think they said 40,000 to 300,000. What this is basically a commitment by different NATO nations to maintain forces on a high alert status so that they could be dispatched to areas of concern in a shorter period of time than normal. So right now, NATO maintains a rapid response force of around 40,000. This is all inclusive, includes Navy, Air Force, ground troops. It's not that impressive, to be honest. 300,000 is a significant number of forces. But what we have right now is a statement of intent on the part of NATO. These 300,000 troops do not exist. I mean, they exist. They're different countries have armies, but they don't have 300,000 troops that are trained, equipped, and provided with logistics sustainability to match the 300,000. So it's an intent, it's a goal, it's objective. And in a perfect world, it might actually occur, but that costs a lot of money. It's not cheap. It's very expensive. To jump ahead for a second, the British, while we have the General Sanders making these statements, the British, because of economic constraints, are continuing to cut their active duty force. I believe the most recent cut takes it from around 84,000 to 72,000 because they can't afford it. They don't have the money. And Europe right now is going through an economic crisis that is only going to get worse. Industries, we talk about the economy. We say, it's numbers, it shrinks. Talk about the amount of dollars in the GDP, et cetera. But when we speak of industries, we're speaking of factories, processes, people, And so when you take a factory and you shut it down, you have to demobilize it. And you can't just snap your finger and remobilize it. Some of these factories are going to be shut down, will be shut down forever. They will never start up again. The jobs that they have are gone. Whatever they produced will be gone. This is the reality of what's about to happen to Europe. They're going to lose industrial capacity forever. Yes, they may be able to rebuild it. I mean, we know that Europe rebuilt after the Second World War, but understand at what cost. So it's one thing to have all these elite politicians meeting in Madrid, Spain, agreeing to a ridiculously high number. It's another thing to actually implement it and make it happen, because it's going to require the reallocation of national economic resources at a time when the nations that are being asked to make this allocation are going to be suffering economic recession and or depression. And the people, remember, a politician made this commitment. There was no election. There was no vote. NATO didn't take this to the people of Poland and say, is this what you want? The people of Denmark didn't get a vote. Politicians made a decision on their behalf. And at some point in time, I believe that a sufficient number of people are going to say, no, we'd rather you spend that money on fixing our problems here at home. Moreover, we don't support these sanctions against Russia. This is suicide. This is stupid. Why are you doing this? And people may even start asking questions about Ukraine, such as when a politician says, we have to support Ukraine because this is about a fight for democracy. You know, people might start saying, but is Ukraine a democracy? Has Ukraine ever been a democracy? Is this really the kind of democracy we want to fight for? There was an interesting interview in Germany where a German journalist put the Ukrainian ambassador to Germany on the spot, saying, you just visited the grave of Stepan Bandera. Why would you do that? Well, the people of Ukraine view him as a great hero. He's a murderer. No, he's not. Yes, he is. I mean, and I think people are starting to ask questions about, you know, what kind of nation is Ukraine and what is it becoming? It's not a democracy. It's a military dictatorship operating under martial law right now. They are passing laws that, that ban the Russian language, ban Russian books. Imagine for a second, just close your eyes. If I said, ban the Jewish language, ban Jewish books, ban Jewish culture, and understand what's happening here, that Europe is embracing a government that is implementing policies that are one word away from a resurrection of the Holocaust. That's what's happening in Ukraine. And there might be people that say, we don't want to be a part of this. We don't want to support this. That doesn't mean that they say, we love Vladimir Putin all of a sudden, but they might say, hey, having good relations with Russia is probably a heck of a lot smarter than what we're doing right now. That we don't have a plan B for energy. Our dreams of a green economy are shot, gone, finished forever. There are always pie in the sky. There's a lot of things that have to be done before you can have a sustainable, green, carbon-friendly economy. But one of the things you can't do is switch over to coal. and Germany is now switching over to coal. Other nations will be switching over to coal as well, because they don't have the natural gas that Russia was producing. And continues to produce and is willing to sell as long as the West's don't, Europe doesn't have these sanctions. But that's another issue. Now we come back to the military side. The U.S. simply, you talked about putting in place a permanent headquarters in Poland. That's always been the plan. A Fifth Corps headquarters is a headquarters around which units would arrive and become part of. Simply by saying that Fifth Corps is now in Poland doesn't mean that the U.S. has a corps, which is 2 or more divisions in Poland. The U.S. may station on a rotational basis or a permanent basis. We don't know yet. But right now, there's a rotational heavy brigade that rotates through Europe every year. So a U.S. Army brigade will rotate, come from the United States and rotate through Europe, and they do various training exercises throughout the NATO countries on the periphery of Russia. There's an additional brigade's worth of pre-positioned equipment there so that other people can fly in. So in a pinch, we could have 2 U.S. brigades with some divisional and corps level support, aviation, artillery, things of that nature, ready in Europe at some time. And if you want to call those 2 divisions 5th Corps, okay. But it's not what it purports to be, meaning that it's not instantaneous power. There would still have to be things that would need to be done. And I will tell you this, that if they ever think about mobilizing 5th Corps because there's a conflict brewing with Russia, I'll give you a pro hint that the storage site, which Poland has built, costing billions of dollars for this pre-positioned equipment, which has to be maintained in typical buildings, et cetera. The Russians have these things called Caliber missiles. We might have been familiar with them. They tend to blow things up in Ukraine now and then, usually on a daily basis, like warehouses containing military equipment, which is what is in Poland, a warehouse with military equipment. If that brigade actually thinks it's going to land in Poland and marry up with this equipment in Poland, you're high. If there's ever a real conflict where the United States starts mobilizing to that extent, let's say, for instance, the Lithuanians don't back away from what they've done right now in Kaliningrad.
Thank you. It was one of my questions, yes.
Yeah, which is a declaration of war, by the way. If they don't back down and Russia does what Russia does, attacks Lithuania, attacks Estonia, attacks Latvia, creating a land corridor linking Kaliningrad with St. Petersburg, destroying the Lithuanian, Estonian, Latvian armies, the German brigade there, the British, all of them will die. Whatever NATO is sent to the Baltic will die at the hands of Russia. That's a reality. And the United States says, this will not stand under Article 5. We're going to send the brigade into Poland. Russia will blow up brigade's equipment before the brigade arrives. That is a statement of fact. Russia will destroy the port facilities that the other equipment has to come in. Russia will destroy the airports where these planes have to land. Russia will destroy the airfields where NATO thinks it's going to bring in reinforcements. Russia is a serious player. And NATO's plans always are, back in the Cold War, the reason why this didn't happen is because we had everything deployed there. We had all of our forces. Well, we had 250,000 forces already in Germany. We had thousands of aircraft already in Germany so that we could buy time for reinforcements to come in through what we called the reforger exercise for 300,000 more American troops to come in to marry up with the pre-positioned equipment. But we were always concerned, what if the Russians destroy the pre-positioned equipment? What are they going to marry up with? So it had to happen quickly. They had to get the forces in within 10 days. It takes 6 months right now for us to gin up a brigade and send it over to Poland. We don't train. These things that happen in clockwork were things that we train for 24/7. That costs a lot of money. We don't do that anymore. So right now, NATO now is playing what I call PowerPoint games. PowerPoint, you can make pretty nice presentations. They have nice arrows, they have figures, and you can make words and you can say words and people look at it and go, oh my goodness, it's not reality. It's just a PowerPoint presentation. These 300,000 troops are not reality. They're a PowerPoint presentation. I don't think NATO is going to be able to do what they say they want to do. And I darn sure don't believe the British are going to be doing anything that scares the Russians. To show you how pathetic the British are, in the lead up to this conflict, the British defense minister traveled to Croatia and demanded a meeting with the Croatian president or prime minister. I can't remember which one, but either one. The Croatian leader said, why would I meet with the British defense minister? they have no military worthy of the name. They're a joke. And they're not a member of the European Union. So I don't want to meet with them. It was humiliating for the British. You have Boris Johnson right now saying things. You have a British general saying things. It's an effort for Britain to appear to be something that they're not. They're a pathetic mid-level country with an economy that, like every other economy in Europe right now, is teetering on the brink of collapse. They have a military that's a joke, no sustainability whatsoever. One question to ask NATO: all of these 300,000 troops that you want to bring up, how much artillery are you going to have? And how many artillery shells per piece have you allocated? Because one of the real truths that's come out of this conflict is that artillery is king. The side with the most artillery is going to win. Two, NATO doesn't have enough artillery, and even if they did, they will run out of ammunition in 10 days. Using the allocation that we see right now in Ukraine, NATO will run out of ammunition in 10 days, and then they all die because the Russians have all the artillery systems in the world, and they apparently have unlimited supply of ammunition because the Russians have been planning for this kind of conflict for some time. NATO has it. NATO's playing catch up. Madrid was simply NATO flexing its muscles. Everything about Madrid was a joke. Let's talk, for instance, about Sweden and Finland. Oh, it was nice that Jan Stoltenberg sat down with the Turkish president and the Finns and the Swede, and they signed this beautiful document that said Turkey will not stand in the way of these two wonderful nations to join so long as they do what Turkey demands that they do regarding the Kurds. And the Finns and the Swedes went, yeah, we'll do that. Well, Turkey's learned its lesson from stupid documents like this because every European diplomat lies to Turkey. They've lied about everything, and they lied about this because the Turks have told the Swedes, we need you to deliver 76 heads on a platter. We got 76 Kurds in your country we call terrorists. You have to give them to us so that we can torture them. They didn't say that, but we know what happens when these guys get in, and we will murder them. Now, the European Union supposedly has these laws about humanitarian protection, humanitarian human rights, etc. So there's no way in hell that Sweden will ever turn over these 76 people to Turkey because they know what's going to happen. Sweden would be expelled from the European Union for news. Many of these 76 are Swedish citizens. So Sweden's going to take their own citizens, hand them to the Turks to be tortured and murdered. It isn't going to happen. Finland just said, we will never do this. And the Turkish president says, yeah, but you know what's going to happen next? My parliament is going to say, we don't support you. Because at the end of the day, even though I signed this letter in Madrid, it's got to be approved by Parliament. And right now I can guarantee that Parliament's going to say no, or as they say in Turkey, hayır, to the membership of Sweden and Finland. So everything that happened in Madrid is fake. It's all fake. It's NATO desperately trying to make itself appear relevant with grand promises and all that. The reality is NATO, as we speak, is being destroyed in Ukraine. Its reputation is being destroyed. Its equipment is being destroyed. Its proxy army, the Ukrainian military, is being destroyed. Its credibility is being destroyed. That's the reality of NATO right now, and it's fracturing. It's easy to have leaders sit around and drink cocktails and eat wonderful food and make jokes about a shirtless Putin that show just how stupid.
Oh my God, that was
they are.
That was, yes.
It's another thing to take that and make it real. There's nothing about the NATO summit that was real. It was all fake. Yes, the US will send ships to Rota, Spain. We already have ships in Rota, Spain. So we're sending a few more. Think about what they're really going to do. Nothing. Yes, we'll send some more airplanes. But remember, sending airplanes requires airfields, requires, you don't just send the airplanes. You have to make sure you have the fuel, the ability to maintain them, and most importantly, weapons. And the one thing we don't have is a stockpile of weapons. because the Russian Air Force has not been fully engaged in Ukraine. If they fight NATO, they will be fully engaged. Now, there's a lot of Russian airplanes, and that means that we have to have a lot of airplanes with a lot of air-to-air missiles. We don't have a lot of air-to-air missiles. So at some point in time, we're going to run out of air-to-air missiles before the Russians run out of airplanes. And like on the ground with artillery, we lose. Logistically, NATO is not prepared to fight a large-scale ground war in Europe against Russia. That's the reality.
Scott, I'm so glad you said this, because I had a moment of real freaking out being in Poland. Do you understand this, right? And I said to myself, what are they doing? Because I see like they are using those Baltic countries and Eastern Europe as this strategic military location to poke this Russian bear and poke it and poke it. And Russia is not stupid, and it's not going to react like, child on sugar. But my point is, why are they doing this? And is there a point when NATO will stop? Is there a moment, let's say, which is coming? This is ultimately what's coming, when Russia will proclaim the victory of the special military operation in Ukraine. It's just a matter of time, and they are not in rush, and it's going to happen. And then what NATO is going to do? How they're going to react? Now, are they like shifting on China now? Tell me how you see this going forward, because I don't understand the logic behind it at all.
Well, the logic of NATO at this point in time is the logic of desperation. Remember, a lot of people, it's bad, we're all focused on Ukraine right now. But last year, NATO suffered its greatest humiliation to date in Afghanistan, where they were abandoned by the United States, told, we're out, you're on your own. And NATO had to leave. And that literally, the humiliation for NATO was mind-boggling. NATO came back and had an existential crisis. Who are we? What are we? What are we? An alliance? Will America come to our assistance? America abandon us in Afghanistan? What is America going to? Pro hint: America will always abandon you. Always abandon you, especially Joe Biden. We're not a serious nation anymore. We're not. We're a nation where all of our policies abroad are determined by domestic policies at home. On the issue of Russia and NATO, we have had no real conversation with the American people about the reality of Russia. The American people have bought into this cartoon caricature of Russia and what Russian is and what NATO is. We have an inflated sense of what NATO is because we knew what NATO used to be. And somehow we think NATO still is that. It's not. NATO is a joke, a political joke. It's an economic joke. It's a military joke. Unfortunately, it's a joke that has nuclear weapons. And that's the only reason why NATO should be treated seriously, is because of the nuclear weapons. But, I was on a show the other day with an American diplomat who one of his last assignments at NATO headquarters. And he said the same thing that I've been saying. You can have Joe Biden fly to Poland and stand up and speak to the Polish people about the sacred responsibility of Article 5, as if it's the Bible. But read Article 5 of the NATO Charter. It's the famous clause, collective self-defense. An attack against one is an attack against all. It doesn't say that. What it says is, if a NATO member is attacked, the other NATO members will take into consideration what they may do in response. There's no obligation to come to the military assistance of anybody. It says to take into consultation whether or not they respond and whether that response may or may not include a military aspect. I can tell you right now that if Lithuania thinks that by picking a fight with Russia in Kaliningrad, that NATO is going to come running to its assistance, they're wrong. Because when Russia smashes them in the face, NATO is going to have a debate saying, hey, who started this fight? Spain's going to say, why are we getting involved in this stupidity that Lithuania did? Turkey's going to say, stick it in your ear. We're not going. Bulgaria's going to say, we got nothing to send anyways. you know, this NATO is a joke, except there's nuclear weapons. But, you know, I'll just leave it there.
But do you see that happening, Scott? Do you see that happening with Lithuania, pushing it that far?
Well, they have pushed it that far. If they don't back down, Russia's going to blow them off the face of the earth. You don't blockade the territory of the Russian Federation. I mean, somehow Lithuania thinks that Kaliningrad is a toy. It's not really Russia. It's just this little enclave here. It's a toy that we can play with. The Russians are like, no, there ain't no difference between Kaliningrad and Moscow. It's the same thing. And you signed a treaty that said you would never do this. And yet you're doing it. Russia doesn't joke around when it comes to Russia.
So, okay, but let me ask you this, because I really don't understand why Lithuania is so idiotically firm on this, what they are doing, if even the most another European Union, I will not gonna use other words, just say European Union, wanted to exempt Kaliningrad from those sanctions. So European Union even said, fine, like, you know, relax. And Lithuania is like, no, 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 no. Why, Scott? What do you think, why?
I think the Baltic states and Poland, I link Poland with the Baltic states in terms of their common enmity towards Russia and all things Russian. The Baltic states live in a state of perpetual fear that they will be abandoned. And they know what will happen if they are ever truly abandoned by the West. They desperately want to be part of the West, but they also recognize that they are isolated from Europe. And so they are insisting on real protection from the West, real guarantees. What they got from NATO were these so-called battle groups, which are reinforced battalion-sized formations from various countries. Looks good on paper, but anybody who knows anything about the military understands that if I send a reinforced battalion-sized battle group to Lithuania, I have now created a nightmare, a logistical nightmare. The one thing you should learn from the war in Ukraine is that modern combat is logistics intensive. Fuel, ammunition, food, water has to constantly go in because these troops are just consuming it. And not just that, manpower and equipment, because even if the tank isn't being destroyed, it's being hit, being shook, it's being used. The engine needs to be maintained. So you have to pull it out to a depot where you have maintenance people ready to fix it. These battalions didn't come with that. So all their equipment's going to go in, and around day 4, if they've lived that long, because the Russian artillery is probably going to kill them, but if they've lived that long, their stuff's going to start breaking. Now they're going to turn to the Lithuanians and say, I got a broken tank. Can you fix it? Oh, dude, we can't fix your tank. See, you lost that tank. I have my artillery piece needs ammunition. Do you got it? Sorry, we're out of ammunition. Do you got it? You didn't bring it with you? We need fuel. You didn't bring that fuel with you? We need food. You didn't bring food with you? You got a battle group here. Where's your sustainability? Now, there's some sustainability that, a unit, an expeditionary unit like that will go forward with what they, the basic combat load plus. So whatever, they'll have enough on them to fight for, 24, 48, 36 hours plus something. Well, that plus something probably isn't going to be there because they're going to be blown up. The Russians are going to hit it. So unless you have them coming in on trucks, but now those trucks have to come across highways that are going to be bombed, attacked, shelled. So any military professional knows that these battle groups that NATO sent to the Baltics are a tripwire, meaning that they can't stop the Russians. They can't even hurt the Russians. What they can do is force the Russians to take into consideration that by attacking the Baltics, you'll have to go through a British unit or a German unit or a French unit, and therefore you'll be fighting those forces. So it's a deterrent. There's a deterrent value. I can tell you that Russia will never be deterred by these if Kaliningrad is threatened with an economic blockade. Russia doesn't care. Russia will do what Russia needs to do to survive, as any nation would, hopefully. So the Lithuanians are these pathetic little punks with a Napoleonic complex who are, batting or fighting well above their weight. These are ultra lightweights jumping in the ring with a heavyweight. They're hoping people are going to come to their assistance, and they continually push the envelope in terms of what they expect, et cetera, because they believe the moment they take their foot off the accelerator and they back down, the West will back out. So their job is to continually keep things in a flux, compel the West to continue to maintain a high level of support. Poland does the same thing. But what they don't realize is asking for support from somebody who is incapable of really providing the support is a fool's errand. Because at some point in time, if the balloon actually goes up and there is a fight, what you think is going to be coming isn't going to be coming. And you're all going to die. I hope Europe is looking at Ukraine right now and understanding what's happened to Ukraine. It's being destroyed piecemeal as a nation, as a nation state. Its industry. Russia didn't want to do this going up front. Russia actually took a very hands-off approach. But gradually, bit by bit, its industrial base being destroyed. Its infrastructure is being destroyed. Ukraine was already a train wreck as a nation. I mean, it had bad infrastructure, bad everything, corruption. It would have taken, hundreds of billions of dollars before the war to get Ukraine up to speed. That's one of the reasons why EU membership is just a joke. Why would the EU commit suicide by bringing in this disaster called Ukraine? They won't. I mean, so again,
it won't even happen, Scott. I mean,
I'm saying, but it's all, you have these European politicians speaking words, wonderful words, but the reality is nothing's going to happen because they can't bring in Ukraine. You think Portugal's economy is the Portuguese are going to say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and tighten our belts so that we can underwrite this Ukrainian disaster. You think the Greeks who are still struggling to get their economy up to par? Yeah. You think Southern Europe wants to allow this train wreck in when Europe hasn't even taken care of their problems? No, it isn't going to happen. The politicians say it's going to happen, but by saying it, you breathe relevance into a struggle that's unsustainable. The Ukrainians labor under the pretense that, they want us in the EU. They just said so. We're going to have a fast-tracked membership application process. Maybe we should keep fighting so that this will happen. It will never happen, just like they will never be members of NATO. And if they continue to fight, there may not be a Ukraine anymore. I mean, that's the sad truth, that the Ukrainian nation may disappear from the face of the earth.
Thank you. I agree with you so on this. And I want to ask you two quick questions because we are shorter with time today. First is, in your opinion, Scott, how much longer the West will be sending weapons to Ukraine? Because this is what's actually dragging this intervention longer and longer. How much longer they will be sending this? Well,
the easiest thing for the West to do is send weapons. I mean, they're emptying out their armories of old weapons, and they're sending these old weapons to Ukraine. I mean, it's embarrassing, to be honest. But it is the Ukrainians are receiving these, and they are able to use some of them, many of them, and it is keeping them in the fight. But they're at some point in time, just basic military math is going to catch up to the equation. Ukrainians started with an army of 260,000 well-trained active duty forces. They had another 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, 600,000 reservists, and they're mobilizing these territorial defense guys. Some of the reservists were trained, many of them weren't. None of the territorial defense guys have any training worthy of the name. To give you an example, there was a story the other day about a Ukrainian special forces commander who said, when the war started, his forces were to NATO standards. He said, we were really good, really good. We were hurting the Russians. He said, but I've lost 80% of my men, 80%. He said, what they're sending me now are guys that are not trained. They don't have any skill set, and yet they expect me to do the same thing. He said, it's unsustainable. We lose every fight we enter right now because we don't have the ability to do this. And that's a special forces unit. Now imagine that you're an armored brigade. You came in with good troops. The reality is tanks tend to break at a greater rate than men die. So you can have an armor brigade where it loses 70% of its tanks, but still has 80% of its troops. And so what you do then is you pull it back and you give them new tanks, new equipment, and then they go back in, and then they lose 70% of the tanks. Now they're down to maybe, because the other thing you have to understand is as combat efficiency, if a unit is purely combat efficient, 100%, I mean, they're going to take casualties, but it's going to be a reduced level because they're trained. They're doing the right thing, but they're getting popped off here, popped up there. But now they shrink, and you bring in guys who aren't trained. That dilutes overall combat efficiency. So the next time they go into battle, they're making more mistakes. So guys are being killed at a greater rate. So you can't just sit there and say, well, if I only lost 10% the first round, I'm only going to lose 10% the second round. No, the second round, you're going to lose 15%. Now you bring in more new guys, fewer trained guys, casualty rates go down. And the guys that are dying are not just the untrained ones, but the trained ones now have to be called on to do more, make up. They don't have the backup. And soon you grind the whole unit down to nothing. That's where the Ukrainians are right now. These active duty forces that used to be pretty darn good are down to nothing. Nothing. They've got nothing. Yeah, we're going to give them 600 tanks. I think Biden just committed, we're going to give you 600 tanks. We're going to give you, I forget how many artillery pieces, 500 artillery pieces. Hey, Joe, who are they going to put on them? Who are they going to put on them, Joe? They're going to put untrained Ukrainian boys on them. Then they're going to send them into the, into the hell.
Suicide. It's suicide.
Eventually, it is suicide. Now, I mean, it doesn't mean that the Russians aren't going to lose people. They are. So you're killing a whole bunch of Ukrainians. You're killing a bunch of Russians, and you're not changing the outcome. And what's going to happen is all of the 600 tanks that we're getting ready to send in are going to be destroyed. That's a 100% guarantee. Every tank we send to Ukraine will either be destroyed or captured. Every artillery piece we send in will be destroyed or captured. So then, but the Ukrainians, because they're fighting for their homeland, I'm never going to call them cowards. So they keep coming up and saying, we've got a whole new bunch of guys ready to do this fighting. Give us more. So we give them more, but they're going to die at a quicker rate. The casualties that the Ukrainians are going to suffer in the coming months are going to be mind-boggling, mind-boggling. It's already mind-boggling. There's people putting numbers out there that 50,000 Ukrainian soldiers have already died, which means about 150,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been wounded. That's 200,000 casualties. And that number is nothing compared to what's going to happen if this level of combat commits, because it's just basic military math. When you send in untrained forces, they will suffer casualties at an extremely high rate. The front line just grinds them up. And the Russians, they're suffering casualties, but they're able to pull back now. They have the luxury of pulling units out of the front line, giving them some rest, getting them some sleep, getting them, getting their equipment fixed and putting back in. And you do that, the Russians are able to maintain the big, to maintain this effort, the push. Whereas the Ukrainians, they're sending boys in, they're dead. They send in the next wave, they pull back, they're dead. There's no rest. The guys that live on the front line, that survive, are exhausted. They're hungry. They don't have fuel. They don't have ammunition. They're angry. They're frustrated. These aren't people. Combat requires people to be thinking very clearly. you need to be solely focused on your job, because you make one mistake in combat, you're dead. It ain't a video game. You don't get to hit reset. You're dead. So combat requires somebody to be totally focused and the team to be totally focused. The Ukrainian team is not focused. The Russian team is focused, which means the Russian lethality is even enhanced to a greater degree. My dogs are going crazy out there. They're agreeing.
Okay. They agree. They are absolutely agreeing, and like full steam ahead. Scott, can I ask you one more question? We have time.
Sure, if the dogs will let me.
If they allow.
Yeah.
I think they will.
Yeah.
Okay. Imagine you have a chance to have a phone conversation with President Putin. And in that conversation, you can share whatever you like, and he will ask for your advice in this current situation and current events. What would you tell him?
I would say that I'm in no position to advise him on the special military operation that's ongoing in Ukraine. That's Russia's business. Only Russia can decide what to do in that extent. What I would say is, Mr. President, I am somebody with some experience in arms control, and I did participate in a very successful exercise of arms control between the United States and the Soviet Union back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that helped walk us away from the brink of nuclear annihilation. I say, Mr. President, I know you're focused on winning this fight in Ukraine. I know you're concerned about NATO expansion, but I would advise you to begin working with whatever outlet you can in the United States to initiate a meaningful conversation about real arms control, because the situation in Europe is only going to get more dangerous. You have proven that you are able to operate in a manner which does not put you in a position where you need to consider using nuclear weapons. So it's not as though you're in a panic mode and you say, Ritter, I'm sorry, we have to have the nuclear weapons. At some point in time, Russia and the United States are going to have meaningful arms control, or the world is going to end. Right now, it's very difficult because the United States as a government isn't reaching out. But there are ways that Russia can interact with the West. For example, I would advise the president to have his Duma hold hearings on arms control and invite Western experts, non-governmental people, but Western experts to come in and testify about arms control, what the concerns of the West are, to start educating themselves as to what the Western mindset is, what's going on in America, what issues would have to be overcome for the United States to consider once again embarking down this path, so that the Russian parliament could then advise the Russian foreign ministry or the Russian military about coming up with ideas on how Russia could be proactive, how Russia could make arms control attractive to the West. These are things that I would talk about. It's none of my business what's going on in Ukraine. I'm in no position to advise Russia about anything. But arms control is my business. It is my passion. And I would advise the Russian president to begin a process of informing Russia about the need for arms control, meaningful arms control.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott, for today. And I really, really want to express my gratitude to you for coming back on my channel, talking to my audience. They appreciate your time. I do appreciate your time. And say hello to the dogs from me as well.
Dogs appreciate your time too.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching. And please click the like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, guys.